But 1 in 3 Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 are living with their parents. Not really surprised. Everything's expensive. Cost of living is expensive, and housing is expensive, and people aren't making as much money. But I'm sure there's more to it.
About 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents.
And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend isn't new.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic.
But that's still a big uptick, 2004 to 2015 or 2012. Like, that's a pretty drastic increase.
In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save, but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
Yeah, the majority of people don't have savings anymore, which is already scary. But rent has increased. Meanwhile, you have to earn a certain percentage to be approved for renting a place. So it has to account for no more than a third of your income or half of your income. But if your income's staying the same, but the cost is increasing, you suddenly can't meet that requirement anymore.
I saw all of the money that I was saving, and I thought, maybe I should stay home for a little bit, and I didn't feel an urgency to move out.
Not everyone is enthusiastic about this trend.
You guys are making 6 figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Told ya. 36% of Americans said
You're making 6 figures together. Yeah, together. And you can't afford a house. The average house in America is over $400,000. If they're making 6 figures together, that doesn't suddenly equate to being able to afford an almost $500,000 house.
in a 2022 survey that more young adults living with their parents is bad for society. So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the U.S. economy.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old, and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated from the University of Miami.
The living with your boyfriend in your parents' house, that's where it starts getting really weird and awkward, and I couldn't do that part.
In 2019 and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
I ended up bartending and waitressing until October, where I got my first offer, so it did take a little bit longer than I expected. Currently live at the Jersey Shore, and I was commuting into New York City, which takes about 2 hours each way. And I thought, in 6 months or so, I'll move into the city, be closer to the job, and the pandemic threw a wrench in those plans.
Victoria now works.
I think there's 4 aspects to this, though. So 1, cost of living is increasing. 2, the wages aren't increasing. 3, people are spending more than they earn on unnecessary stuff. Like if you watch something like Caleb Hammer and all of his financial audits and people that are getting food delivered constantly, groceries are already expensive, but if you're getting food delivered on a regular basis, that skyrockets the cost of all of that. And then people saying, well, they can't live the life they want. I know a lot of people that like to buy really stupid stuff, and that's going to affect their situation. But I would say the primary reasons are the income versus cost of living. But those other factors, they definitely play a part.
A fully remote job, which she says she probably wouldn't have.
Oh, and she's working remote, which is great. And there's so many remote jobs out there that, a lot of people they want to say, well, I want to live in that cool, trendy place, whatever. If you want your own space, move to a less popular, less cool area, maybe a little further out and whatever. But if you work a remote job, you can have a good salary while living in a lower cost of living area. Like there's so many people in major cities that say they can't afford to live there, but how many of them do you think really need to live in that city? Yeah, there's not the possibility for everybody to work remotely, sure, but a significant amount of people could and be in a better financial situation by doing so.
If it weren't for the pandemic, without a commute to worry about, she was able to stay at her mom's for longer.
It's a lot harder for young people today to save up for, markers of the American dream than it was for previous generations. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks. And so, for example, if they suffered a layoff or they suffer some sort of health shock or they got in a car accident, if they didn't have any additional credit to weather that shock, they would end up moving back home. The financial stability of young adults, their ability to pay for things if they got into an emergency, was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
This can have ramifications for setting up a financial future.
So I was raised in a way where if I didn't have it in my account, I couldn't spend it. I didn't get a credit card until I was at least 20, I think. And even that, it was like an only for emergencies credit card. So if I didn't have the cash in the bank, I didn't spend it. But I was also raised in a way where I shouldn't go to my parents for help unless it was absolute emergency. Like I was out living on my own, early 20s, and I lost my job at the time. And I immediately was just like, all right, how can I make this work? Because it was also at the worst time ever because it's right at the end of the year and it's so much harder to find a job then. And as soon as that happens, you're like, oh crap, I got to change everything. But in my situation, I was like, all right, at the time, I will call out, didn't have family, didn't have people depending on me. So that is a huge factor. But this is also talking about young people. So I think that makes sense. However, I was like, all right, I'm living off of peanut butter and protein shakes right now. That's all I got. That's what's in my cabinets right now. That's all I get to eat. And so I ate that for weeks, which is obviously not very healthy. I cashed out everything I possibly could just to make sure I could survive long enough until I got my next job. And I didn't have any sort of fallback at that point. It was scary. It was a little bit of a crazy time. But for some reason, even though I know my parents would have helped me out, that was like the last option in my mind. I don't know why, but it's just kind of how I was raised up of like, that should only be like the most dire situation that I call them and ask them for help, or I go move back in with them. Like that they would have been looking at me funny, like, why are you back here? So I'm happy I struggled through it. It makes me appreciate a lot more, but times are a little different now. Things are hitting even harder. But I think our dependency on credit cards, our dependency on debts is growing, which is a big, big problem. Can't buy a home but refuse to rent.
Roughly 1 in 4 Gen Z adults say housing costs are one of the biggest challenges to financial success.
The prices of homes has escalated over the last few decades much faster than actual incomes. So it is actually much harder for a millennial or a Gen Z to save up for a down payment to buy a home. And that's something that bears out in the data.
The pandemic did have a lot to do with it. I saw how much I was saving and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be paying, upwards of $3,000 a month and making somebody else richer when I could stay at home, save that money, and spend it on where I want to spend it. Between
$3,000 a month is a lot. I know she's supposed to be in Jersey, but that's a pretty high rent. So unless she was in like a really nice area or something, that part doesn't add up. But her also saying that she's making somebody else richer, most of the time, unless you're renting from a place that is part of a massive conglomerate or whatever, individual landlords don't make a huge profit. Most of the time, they are usually just covering the mortgage that they have on the building when it comes to individual landlords. And then they usually have a little bit on top of that, either for some profit. It's not some extreme amount of profit, like she's trying to make it seem, but for some profit, or to at least cover the cost if anything breaks or anything major needs to be fixed.
My job and my bartending and waitressing, I make anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000 a year. I would say about 40 to 50% of my salary is going right into savings. My mentality is, why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a house.
Young adults ages 25 to 34 in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly 26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022, while the median value of a home in the region was
the median income is over 130. That's a pretty high. That's a pretty decent median income.
Around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something to her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
You have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport your first time.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year. You guys are making six figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house.
Yeah, and she's not at the same time, she is in no way factoring in the actual cost of that house, which is very frustrating. And it seems to be the case every time we have somebody like this on one of these videos.
They just don't want to spend their money.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore. Where am I finding a $270,000
I'm
house?
not making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Yeah, look at that, see?
At least it was immediately like, oh, I guess I was wrong.
We do also have a situation that what is really good for an individual person or an individual family is not necessarily good for the entire macroeconomy.
The Federal Reserve estimates in a 2019 paper that young adults who move out of their parents' house would spend around $13,000 more per year on things such as housing, food, and transportation.
One of the big boosts to consumer spending is when people form households. Whether you're a renter or a buyer, you need to furnish that house. house. You need to fix things up in the home to make it livable. You end up spending a lot of money during that time. So if the pace of household formation slows down, then that's going to slow down the pace of consumer spending, and that will produce a drag on the economy.
And there's also a lot of people that, like, when there is something that needs to be fixed or repaired or whatever at their house, I am not very handy, but I still go to YouTube and find a bunch of videos on how to fix something or how to do something small, which a lot of people don't do now. Like, I know a couple people that they're like, oh, well, this faucet needed to be replaced in my house. I'm like, okay, cool. Did you want to just go do that? And they're like, no, I'm finding a plumber to do all this stuff. I'm like, replacing a faucet is like, it's super easy to do. And they're like, oh, it seems really hard. And I'm like, watch a 10-minute video on how to do it, and it'll save you a ton of money. Not everybody can do that type of thing, but like, more people should.
Other issue is that there aren't enough affordable properties in popular areas for younger people who are in entry-level jobs and making less money.
Any sort of housing policy needs to be multi-pronged. Are there homes that are at the price point of these prospective home buyers? What can we do to increase the housing supply? What can we do to build? What can we do to help elder Americans, to help them downsize and move into more right-sized homes that will open up larger homes for young families?
And a lot of these houses that are being built too quickly are being built with not great quality. Like, I see so many issues with new builds on a regular basis as I'm just like going through videos and stuff.
I think one alone is not really going to do it. We've got to look both at demand as well as supply.
The other major factor here is how much student loan debt young Americans have. 59% of US adults say they've delayed financial milestones because of their student debt.
I do have a student loan payment. It's about $480 a month. So that's my largest expense.
The liability could be worse for Black borrowers, who tend to have higher than average student loan debt and less wealth than white counterparts.
I actually was applying to a bunch of jobs throughout the US a while back, and I noticed that any job I was applying to in New York City was a considerable amount less in salary than any other place I was applying. As I lived in the Chicago area, but I worked in tech, so the Chicago area wasn't getting paid as much as California, obviously, but I was very surprised that New York, which is definitely more expensive than Chicago, was paying less. And then I started digging into why, and it turns out that there is a massive difference in the market because it's so much easier for Canadians to come and work there. And because of that, they don't have student debt like US people do. And so that drives that market down as far as the salaries. But then the people that still have the student loans have to deal with that new market, which is super, super rough for people in New York. Ugh.
Hispanic respondents were more likely to say that debt was holding them back from reaching financial milestones. Less than half of white respondents said the same.
The amount of debt young adults held also rose substantially between 2005 and 2014, during that period of strong escalation in that cohort living with their parents.
Aggregate student loans are such an enormous part of the economy now, and that's not a reflection of younger people making bad choices with their education. It's really a consequence in large part due to the fact that there's less public funding and going to college just is more expensive, which makes it even harder for even those college grads who are hoping to get earning more money as a result of their college degrees.
Well, one, they're usually not earning that much more as a result of their college degrees, but two, there are some bad choices being made, but you can't really expect that much more from an 18-year-old signing on to a huge chunk of debt. Because if they went to a trade school or something like that, that would be a better choice a lot of the time because it's more guaranteed work usually, and it oftentimes pays better than office work. But somebody going to get a degree that's something that doesn't matter at all or is not something they could ever get a job in is also a major issue. And then top that all off with people going straight into a 4-year institution that costs way, way more than if they were to spend their first 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a major university. Anybody that I know that has gone the route of community college, then university, nobody cares where they started. They care where you got a degree from. But they suddenly have almost half of the cost, which is huge.
Student loan debt by itself can't explain the phenomenon, especially considering so many European countries with much less student loan debt have higher rates of young adults living with their parents.
But that's
24
just
out of 29
how it
European
is.
countries had more 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents in 2021 than the U.S. It was over.
That's more of a cultural difference, I feel like. My wife is not from the U.S., and most of the people she knows that aren't married live with their families. And some of them that are married, they have their in-laws move in with them because it's just such commonplace.
Over 70% in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Serbia, and Croatia.
My boyfriend is Brazilian, and multi-generational homes are very common in almost everywhere else in the world, except in the United States. So I'm just taking a page of their playbook.
The Americans are probably the only people that they're not multi-generations in one house. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Why do we have to be so cold to push everybody out?
You know, there are a lot of cultures out there in which it is normal to live with your parents until you get married. And I don't think there's necessarily an economic explanation for that.
The Franklins would say in the US, it is the economy, but Victoria's mom is kind of okay with it.
Unfortunately, it is the economy and the world that we live in that just doesn't allow them to go live a comfortable life. So with them living here was no big deal. It's not really a problem. They're saving their money. Eventually they'll buy a house, and that works.
I feel like there's a lot that wasn't dug into. But yeah, people can't afford it. Cost of living goes up. Wages stay the same. And then it's like, oh, I wonder why they can't afford things. It's kind of obvious. And then you add on extra expenses that didn't used to be there. Yeah, that's going to make it way, way worse. Like, people didn't used to have these insane student loan debt. They didn't have to. But on top of that, there's a significant amount of financial literacy that people don't have that they should. And then people are getting saddled with bad decisions that they made as a teenager that then get stuck with them for their entire lives because they thought it was the best thing ever to go to school when they could have explored some other options or gone to a community college or start whatever. There's so many aspects to this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with still living with your family for a little bit. I moved out as quickly as possible because that was what was best for me, but it's not best for everybody. But I can see why people would still be living at home.